Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, hello, greetings, and welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast. We're back again this time with a follow-up interview from a guest that we had on a couple of months ago talking about digital skills. On this episode, I've invited Andrew Daly, a partner at specialist recruitment firm Edbury Daley, back onto the show to talk about a follow-up topic that I wanted to have with him, which was all about how can procurement professionals make themselves relevant and transition into a career in procurement technology. And to set the scene here, procurement pros are pretty burnt out. I know all of my procurement heroes out there. I come from the practitioner space as well. It can be a pretty unrelenting job and a pretty thankless task a lot of the time. And I know that a lot of you may be thinking, how can I leverage the skills that I've gained and stay within this general sphere of procurement and supply chain, but perhaps apply my skill set differently in a role where there's perhaps not as much direct stress and pressure on me, and perhaps even to just get a little bit more fulfillment and recognition from the work that you do. And working for a software company, while it's not perfect and there are some flip sides to it, which we'll dig into with Andrew, could definitely be a career path that may be an opportunity for you, especially if you're perhaps more towards the beginning of your career. Obviously, it's going to be more difficult. You've got 30 years experience in a specific space. But that's what we're going to dig into today with Andrew. So Andrew, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Thank you, James. Great to see you again. Appreciate you having me back on.
So if anyone didn't catch the first episode, just give a really quickly, just give an intro as to what you do as a recruitment firm and why, your niche is particularly well qualified to speak on this topic.
So we're specialist recruiters in digital procurement and supply chain, which means we recruit for software vendors, the consultancies they often partner with, and the end user customers. But everything we do is related to digital procurement. So it's either the use of the tools, the sale and the implementation of the tools, the transformation. It's all around digital.
Got it. And that's why I think you're a great person to chat to on this. So let's take someone with a strategic procurement background. So we're not talking about more administrative transactional roles. Let's say you've got a few years experience as a category manager or maybe as a procurement business partner, and you're perhaps looking around thinking, that this isn't really where I want to stay for the next 20, 25, 30, probably 50 years, the way we're going these days, if the retirement age keeps going up. If they're looking to transition into the world of procurement technology, can you give a few broad pointers, first of all, of what advice you would give them to make themselves attractive to those types of companies that are recruiting?
Of course, James. Yeah. So number one, if you're a procurement professional and you want to get into digital, first thing you've got to do is educate yourself about the digital world. You've got to understand what tools are out there, what problems they solve, what opportunities they create, how you use them. And to use a phrase we don't use so much anymore, which used to be around, try and turn yourself into a super user of digital procurement tools so that if you're sat in an interview, you can talk to a hiring manager and explain that you really get what role tech can play in the modern world of procurement. So educate yourself on that. Okay. And then think about the core transferable skills that you've got that you think will be an asset. So for example, the people I've had most success of moving from a procurement job into working for a procurement tech vendor have typically been around the thing called customer success, where the vendor wants somebody who understands their customer. So if you go into that role, James, you can say to the customer, I'm an ex-procurement professional. I understand the challenges you've got. I understand the problems you face. I use this technology as well when I was a procurement person. Let me show you how to use it more effectively and drive better customer success for the end user. So that's where we've had a lot of success doing that because they understand their audience. And then you look at things like relationship management skills, and commercial skills, technical skills, digital skills, they're the things that are really transferable from one side of the fence to the other. And if you can add in there some sort of entrepreneurial or commercial mindset that makes you're very, very conscious of how you drive, quite frankly, better results for your customer and therefore better revenue results for your employer, then, that is also a very valuable asset as well.
Fantastic answer. There's a couple of things that I'll unpack then a little bit there. So the absolute gold standard, or the royal flush in poker terms, I guess, is that if you're working in an organization where you've already got a digital procurement app that you're using, be it one of the legacy source to pay suites or perhaps something more best of breed in like SRM or contract management or sourcing or whatever it might be, if you're able to befriend the account manager for your organization that works for that software company or even talk to your boss and say, hey, I'd like to really expand my knowledge in and become a super user for this particular platform, that would be a good long-term play, right? If you've got your eyes on the prize and you want to start somewhere, that would be a natural place to start.
Yeah, for sure.
If you don't have that luxury of having a digital procurement tool that you can upskill yourself on and become a super user on, or if you don't have a relationship to anyone that works for those procurement tech companies, the second part of your answer that you gave around learning some entrepreneurial skills and understanding customer success and what makes a business successful beyond procurement, which is typically saving money on the bottom line. If you learn more about what do you need to do to generate and keep, top line revenue and results, reading some business books or understanding, maybe even try to start a side hustle and build up like a micro business in your spare time, selling stuff online or creating some digital products or something like that, to understand a little bit around sales and marketing and customer mindset. I really like that because that's something that anyone can do without necessarily having to have, shoe through a foot in the door with being able to leverage having an existing digital procurement tool in place with their existing employer. So yeah, it's something that I think that anyone can apply from what you said there.
Yeah. Enhance your digital literacy, maybe develop some technical proficiencies. We touched on in our previous conversation in the past podcast. And you say, like the point you made there about a side hustle, go out there and trying to do different things and develop different skills. When you're sat in an interview and somebody's asking you to evidence what you can bring to the organization, you've got a great story to tell, haven't you? If you're trying to get a job in competition with another person, if you can show that ambition and passion for self-improvement, you've taken yourself from not knowing much about something to being an expert. What sort of leaders don't want to hire people with that sort of mindset?
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, if you've grown an Instagram account to 10,000 followers, or if you've got a yoga studio that you help to run part-time, or selling ebooks on a website that you've developed, it's a very transferable skill set that you can bring, as well as the knowledge of the product and the people that you're selling to, if you're going back into the procurement space as the end customer. Yeah. Making that switch then from working in what's called sort of the buy side, which is procurement, buying, purchasing, to essentially the sell side. And that doesn't necessarily being a salesperson, but essentially working on the sell side, that you're working for a software company that's selling to procurement. How easy do you think that is to transfer? Are there certain personality traits? I should have asked you this before, but are you familiar with the different colors? I don't know if you've read the book Surrounded by Idiots, where you have like the red, yellow, green and blue colors and the different personality traits that links back to.
I've not actually read that particular book, but look, to your wider point about personality traits, are there certain ones that transfer better than others? Yes, of course there are. I mean, it depends on the role in the software vendor. It'd be sales, customer success, implementation, adoption. But, like any role, certain traits, certain personal qualities and skills translate better to some jobs than others, of course.
And what personality traits would you say they are? I mean, it's often the argument, do salespeople need to be, or do people that are more customer focused need to be extrovert? I would disagree with that, but a lot of people in those types of roles do tend to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that thinking was very common some time ago, but if I sit and look at the work that I do, it's not thought about that way. So, if you look at the demand for salespeople, from big software vendors now. You want people who can really plan the territory that they're responsible for trying to win work from. You want people who can follow processes like MEDDIT. So that's not about a personality style. That's about actual planning, analysis, evaluation, the ability to follow a process through, to do simple things like contact people when you're going to send you a contact them and engage them properly. So certainly in sales, any sort of client-facing role, the ability to build relationships is very, very important. But if you're a procurement person, that's stakeholder engagement. If you're a sales or account management person, that's building relationships with your customer. Those two sort of, scenarios require broadly the same skill sets. But the idea that all salespeople are extroverts is a little bit out of date now, in my opinion. It's the ability to follow a good process, engage with the customer, and, things like understanding value and actually drawing out what problems the customer's trying to solve and what obstacles there may be to putting a solution into an organisation and at what point they will want to buy it, what's driving their decision. These are things that require much more than an extrovert personality. It's about discovery, it's about analysis, it's about, being methodical and thorough in your approach to your discussions with your conversations. So, that's the demand I see from sales leaders now, which is not just, the extrovert sort of, relationship builder who takes people, plays golf or takes them out for dinner and what have you. Those days, there's still a place for some of those qualities, don't get me wrong, but that's not the priority in what I see people hiring these days.
No one's got any budget to do that anyway these days, have they?
Oh, that's a fair point, James. Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, I remember that. The good old days in procurement when we used to get invited to the rugby and the football. We can't do that anymore. Yeah. So building on from what you just said, I'm generalizing a little bit here, but I tend to see two broad sort of characters within procurement. So first of all, I tend to see the more business-minded, entrepreneurial type of procurement professionals that are more creative in their problem-solving ability and are more business-focused in terms of what drives them to get their role done. And then on the other side, I tend to see the ones that are more process and compliance-driven and tend to rather do something perhaps a little bit more slowly, but do it right and by the book. Would you say that the former then is probably going to be better suited to working in a role with a software company or on the sales side?
On the sales side, yes, it would seem like a fairly obvious connection to make there on the sales side. And also, when we hear about customer success, sometimes that is actually just getting the customers to work effectively. But sometimes customer success really means account management, which is grow the account. It depends on the emphasis within the software company. I think that former description certainly lends itself well to what I would call revenue generating role. But that second personality still has a place. So, for example, if you're one of the suite providers and you've got a big customer that's got an awful lot of people using the tool and you've got some gaps in their effectiveness, a more analytical, methodical individual who can sit down and understand processes and where the gaps are in what an organisation is experiencing and identify the real crux of the problem. That person's also got a place as well, albeit in a different role. So that's probably much more of a true customer success or maybe an adoption-focused role or a problem-solving type role like value engineering and things like that. So they've still got a place. But yeah, at the heart is still that ability to foster meaningful working relationship with your customer.
Yeah, I was thinking even perhaps working in product as well would be a good one if they're very thorough and very detail-oriented. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good. Well, actually, James, I've had a conversation with somebody recently. He was a procurement person turned product person, and he was outstanding because, again, to my earlier point today and in our previous discussion, the ability to understand your audience. That is what really would be critical factor in somebody making that transition from procurement professional into vendor or to a degree consultant. Your ability to understand and empathize with your audience, that's what you've got to offer because you understand that job and you've done it before. And that is something which is at the heart of the people who've made that transition successfully. Something that I've been involved in and all those that I know that made that move without my help.
Okay, so we've touched on a few of the roles and a few of the personality traits that could be a good fit for those specific roles within software companies if you're moving from a procurement background. I think it's fair to say that generally speaking, it's easier to make a career change earlier on in your career. But do you see a particular sweet spot where those lines cross and it becomes the easiest, where you've got the right amount of experience and you can add value, but you're not pricing yourself out of the market or becoming too obsolete with the skill set that you've built?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Careful choice of language, because I don't want to sound ageist, but I would argue that the perception is that perhaps people in their late 20s and early 30s are really ripe for that sort of change. The theory being that they've got a few years experience after their education, wherever the level of education they got to. They've got a few years experience that gives them enough knowledge and credibility. They've got a few miles on the clock that they could sit opposite senior people and be credible. But theoretically, they're still hungry, ambitious, youthful, and therefore are more adaptable and capable of change. So there's definitely that theory's definitely got merit. But I think it would be unfair of us to dismiss people who are older than that, because, in my opinion, that sort of curiosity, mindset, ambition is not an age thing; it's a mindset thing. There are people who are older than me, which is old, who've still got that mindset, and I personally think I'm more open to change now. I've been at any stage of my personal career. But there are examples of people who, for example, have been very senior procurement leaders and then have moved into consultancy, perhaps in their 50s, for example, because they've got the credibility, because they can sit opposite a CPO and say, I've been here before. And because also they've got a very strong personal network, which if you're going to go into a senior role in sales, whether that be consulting or software, the ability to be able to pick up the phone and speak to somebody you've known for 20 years and get a conversation with them is not to be undervalued. So I think it comes back to mindset, but I would say that round about that 30s point, either side, because of the sort of the adaptability, or a little bit more miles on the clock, 40s, 50s, because you've got that gravitas, experience and network.
To your point on those that are a little bit older, I often see former heads of procurement or directors of procurement that move into more advisory roles with procurement tech companies, and they do tend to be in their late 40s or their 50s typically, because to your point, they've got the little red book of contacts and they've got enough battle scars from doing frontline procurement and seeing the different scenarios and what can go wrong. So yeah, I would buy into that too. What do you think are some of the watchouts then if someone's looking to go and work for a procurement tech company? It's not all milk and honey. There are downsides to it. The obvious one being obviously the earlier stage the startup, the more likely, generally speaking, it is that they won't make their next round of funding. What else would you say are the watchouts there?
Well, let's take that one first. So that sort of small organisation feels risky. Obviously, startups can be quite chaotic, can be very up and down journey. So, of course, that is going to feel more of a risk than working for a big corporate if you've been a senior procurement professional in big corporate world for many, many years. But I mean, that's part of the fun, which perhaps we'll come to. I think whatever size of organisation you're joining when you're making that sort of transition, you've got to look at the people you're going to go and work for, the leaders of that organisation, and ask yourself, do you believe in their vision? Do you think that their business plan is credible? Are their growth plans credible, meaningful, achievable? Ultimately, are you going to have enough time to make the transition and become an effective and viable member of that team? Because you're not going to just walk in the door on day one and be, the finished article for that organisation. So it's looking at the people above you. You've got control of the organisation and asking yourself, do you truly believe they've got the qualities for them to back up what they've said to you during the interview process when they've sold you the dream of coming to work for a great company and we're going to achieve this and this is our growth plans. So are they credible? So you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to do your due diligence on the funding, culture, look at how long people have been there. So look at the tenure of current and previous employees. That's a little insight into how long they give people to be effective. Things like that. Do detailed due diligence on the organisation and ask yourself, will I be given the time to become an asset to this organisation? Because if not, you might feel very vulnerable from day one or very early on, I should say. And then, you're constantly looking over your shoulder thinking, do I really fit here? Will I be given the time to be?
Yeah. And the longer that you're with a particular employer, then the more benefits that you accrue as well in terms of redundancy payouts and pensions and that type of thing. But going back to your point about people being in their late 20s, early 30s, being a good fit to going into a full-time role, they've probably not accrued that much service or that much pension benefit anyway in their current role. So I don't necessarily think for that particular age bracket, that's going to be a big one. Where I do see a lot of upside, curious to get your thoughts on this as well, but career progression to me feels a lot more malleable and a lot faster, especially if you're good and you're willing to work hard in a startup or in a younger, more dynamic organization than in a large corporate. And that can certainly, even if it means you have to take a bit of a pay cut, if you're getting equity or shares as part of your package, or you've got that faster career path because there are fewer layers between you and the CEO, that's definitely another one to consider longer term, isn't it?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, if you are at that age group where perhaps you've not got any kids yet, or you've not got as big a cost for properties and such like, living costs, and you prefer to take a little bit of a risk. But yeah, it can be a real accelerator to your career because you go into a small organisation, you probably have to wear a number of different hats, get exposed to a lot more decision making, get exposed to a lot more challenges around how the business is actually run, rather than just running your own little siloed area, for example. So you're getting much more exposure, much more responsibility, often having to do different things, feeling the pressure of the risk, but feeling the excitement and enjoyment of the journey and the growth and really making a difference as well. Actually really making a meaningful difference. If you're working for a software giant and you win one new customer, it's just still a new customer. If you're working for a startup and you win one new customer, that could be the game change that enables them to go and get more funding, hire more people, develop the product, etc., etc. So, it pros and cons, but it not different environments for different people. But if you're minded to want to take that risk, it can really turbocharge your career. And of course, that was what was said about going to consulting a few years ago, wasn't it? Because you'd get to work with lots of different organisations, see how different things are done. So 1 year's experience in consulting might be worth 4 years' experience in corporate. I'm not sure that's still the case, but I'd certainly argue that you can learn a lot more quickly in a chaotic, fast-going startup than you might do in a more mature, stable organisation.
And as you said, you're probably going to have to wear a lot more hats, but you're also, the work that you're doing is probably going to be more meaningful as well. And even though you might have to wear a lot of hats and figure certain things out yourself, I would hazard a guess that in most startups or in most younger tech companies, you're not going to be spending a lot of time on process and bureaucracy that you would be in corporate. So it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's different strokes for different folks depending on what work they find valuable and rewarding. There's no right or wrong answer. I know what I would find more rewarding, but not everyone takes the same.
Well, that's it. I mean, you made a really valid point about process. So in some days, startups, you make it up as you go along. Some people will hate that. Some people want to have an established process to follow. And that's what they take their satisfaction from doing. Whereas others like, yeah, there's a blank sheet of paper. We've never done this before. How do we do it? And learning. And also, and we often overlook this, particularly in interview processes, such like, we usually learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. And the ability to admit to that and recognize that and articulate that is something which I often coach people on for interviews. But, when you get it wrong, you learn more than perhaps if it all goes to plan.
100%. So we didn't do this last time, Andrew. So normally we do a quick fire round at the end of each interview when we have a guest on. We didn't do it in the first interview because I deliberately saved it for this one. So I've got 2 quick questions. Doesn't take much thought. Just tell me whatever pops into your head. So if you could live anywhere in the world, apart from Manchester, which is obviously the second best city in England after Birmingham, where would it be?
Ibiza.
Like going back to your youth, Andrew?
No, it's going back to my current passion. So it's the climate, it's the food, it's the beautiful beaches, it's the sunsets. They've got some nice golf courses, but they've got some amazing nightlife. And my guilty pleasure is that I would argue I quite enjoy being the oldest person in the club. Not in Manchester, but I do in Ibiza.
Okay, interesting. Wasn't expecting that. And then finally, and you've got to keep this one clean, what's your favourite guilty pleasure?
Yeah, I think it'd be staying in nightclubs in Ibiza all night when I'm the wrong side of 50. I think it's probably my goal.
God, you're a better man than me. At 1 a.m, all I want now these days is a kebab and to go home.
Got a nice sun lounge you can sleep on all day, James.
So, Andrew, if anyone would like to learn a little bit more or maybe just pick your brain a little bit about making that transition and looking for potential companies that may be hiring, where's the best place that we can send them to?
So LinkedIn is where I spend an enormous amount of my time. People can always get me on LinkedIn, but if they want to sort of learn more about what we do and the information we share, I would point people towards our YouTube channel, so the EdburyDaley YouTube channel, where we put an awful lot of content on there. That's a real chance to educate yourself on what we do and, really decide whether you actually want to engage with us person to person before you take that step. So, head off to YouTube and enjoy all the content we share, which also is on LinkedIn, of course, as well.
And we'll link to all of that in the show notes. And indeed, if anyone's listening to this and just wants to drop me a DM just to get my thoughts on this and pick my brain, I'm not a recruiter, I'm not a coach, but I do have a lot of connections, obviously, in this space, in the procurement tech space. So I may have an idea of which company is doing well or who may be hiring in the future. So by all means, drop me a message as well if you want to have a chat. Always a pleasure talking to you, Andrew. Thanks for coming on. And wishing you all the best.
James, thank you. Really enjoyed it. And I hope the audience has found it as enjoyable as I have.
So that's it. If you're maybe thinking about your next career move and you want to move to potentially work for a procurement tech company, I hope Andrew's tips there were valuable to you. Just a quick one before we sign off. We do have a monthly newsletter over at procurementsoftware.site where we bring you a roundup of everything that's been happening each month in the procurement tech space. And I also typically do quick 5 to 10 minute video of what's on my mind related to the industry. So if you'd like to get that, then just hop over to our website, procurementsoftware.site, and then click on the footer where it says subscribe to newsletter, and we will get that to your mailbox each month. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you again same time next week. Until then, bye for now.